Okay, good morning. This is the Rural Economic Development Working Group on January 21st. We're meeting at 8 a.m. in the morning. So welcome all. We will be having a guest presenter this morning, or a group of guest presenters coordinated by Paul Costello with the Vermont Council on Rural Development, talking about the Working Lands Enterprise Board and its various projects. So that is what our topic is today. And then we'll have some time at the end to talk about existing bills or bills that members are presenting, just to become aware of what else is out there concerning rural development. Remember, next week we're meeting with Liz Porter from the Scott administration, talking about Act 250 reform, what they're bringing to the legislature and looking for in terms of reform. And I would ask again that if you do have specifics, I am putting together a list of specific requests on the part of our Rural Economic Development Working Group or concerns about Act 250, so that we can start to get that document together, and then we can share that with everybody as part of an evolutionary learning process as to what needs to be addressed, or what's important to the caucus, I should say. Right? Okay, so specifics would be great. So with that, Laura, do you want to say something before we go on to Paul?
I do, just really quickly, just why reminding us why we have Paul and Rural Development here this morning. Our caucus has a long history on this issue, and that is driven by a number of public hearings that we have had. Typically, we've had those in the second part of the biennium, the second year of the biennium, and inevitably we a large amount of the testimony that we hear about is around the working lands, and so this is an issue that we are perennially interested in and hearing about. So I just wanted to kind of reframe us why we're here this morning, and I think that's it.
Good. Paul, take it. Or do you want to be a host? Do you want to make somebody else a host to share anything, or do you want to just go?
I don't necessarily need to be a host. I shared with Catherine a sheet that is a summary sheet from the Working Lands Collaborative, but I'm just going to share some thoughts and then be glad to have a dialogue with members of the caucus.
Fair enough.
So thank you so much, Representative Kimbell and Representative Sibilia, for inviting me. I just would want to say first, I had a day with Chip Conquest, former representative, former co-chair this weekend, who wanted to say hi to everyone. He's deeply interested in what you're all doing. He's very excited in his retirement, and he's, as you know, a working lands entrepreneur himself. He's expanded his meat business, where he's helping lots of small farmers and homesteaders in his part of Vermont deal with slaughter, deal with processing, and helping families live connected to the land in Orange County. And he's incredibly busy in the COVID period doing that work. So I'd love to tell you a little bit of the history of the Working Lands, and also thank you all for your leadership. The Working Lands Enterprise Program is a significant initiative that came out of the House. It came out of House Ag. It came out of the Rural Working Group. And you folks have been the leaders in framing the process, in pushing the process forward, and also in ensuring that there's funding for enterprise investment in the working lands for the last 6 or 7 years. So thank you so much for your leadership. The idea for a working lands enterprise investment structure came from originally the Council on the Future of Vermont, which was one of the largest evaluations of state values, goals, and priorities in the history of Vermont. This was done in 2009. The Council on Rural Development produced it with lots of partners. The process interviewed literally thousands of Vermonters, went to 100+ different organizations, from Kids in Jail to meet with Greater Burlington Industrial Corporation, mobile home park people, land trust people, farmers, foresters. We learned a lot. We tested what we learned with polling and with trend line analysis, and the trend lines around The forest products industry showed us 40% decline in the number of mills in the state of Vermont in the last 10-year period before that. And in dairy, it showed us a trend line that has been steady ever since, with the failure of large-scale dairy farms and small dairy farms in Vermont. One of the most important findings of the process was we developed a set of values, and then we asked Vermonters to rank them, and thousands of Vermonters were polled. The highest ranking value that was supported by the greatest majority of Vermonters, over 90%, 97% of Vermonters, was the value of the working landscape and its heritage, that this defines this place, that our connection to the land, our connection to nature, our preserved, conserved working land, and the families and the entrepreneurs and the hard work of generations of stewards that have produced the landscape that we love is essential to the Vermont character. When you think about that, you look at the beautiful fields around, none of it is an accident. None of the forest that's in Vermont is an accident. It's here because it works, because it contributes to the rural economy, and because people have found ways to make a living connected to that and also steward it for the future. And so that's particularly important today. One of the things that we see as we look at what we've learned from this COVID challenge and the food systems challenge that we faced is how important the local food system is, how important it is to keep local production strong, how important it is to do value-added development, and how important it is to be cycling dollars locally in our economy for the sustainability of our local communities. From the Council on the Future of Vermont, we built the Working Lands Council that, with people like Roger Albee and Chuck Ross, it was very bipartisan. Will Stevens from your committee was on it, as was Mike Snyder, the now Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. And we looked systematically at the last 40 years of public policy for working lands, in the Agriculture Committee, on the Senate, on the House side, what all the different studies have said about working lands on all that period. And the big results aren't any surprise. That Vermont is more dependent on one commodity than any other state in terms of its agricultural development, and that's dairy. And that's a strength, but it's also a challenge in that we are subject to commodity economics based on the milk price, which we have zero control over, and which determines the success or failure of farms, and fluctuates on a 3-year cycle, and sometimes that cycle goes down even longer than 3 years. It's coming back a little bit right now, but let's face it, our dairy farms have been through the mill for the last 5 years or so. And as you all know, we're down to about 650 from the 11,000 we had at the end of World War II. And many of them are in challenging positions. So the Working Lands Council looked at these cycles and the problems in the forest products industry, and we found that the two big things in public policy that are constants is the constant call for diversification of agricultural products, the diversification of what we're growing, the extension of creativity through the agricultural network. And we've seen a lot of diversification over time, and we've seen lots of models that are successful. The other side is value-added development. We don't want to compete for the bottom of a commodity market. We want to compete for the greatest cheeses in the world. We want to compete with ice creams, with yogurts, rather than competing for the bottom of the economy in the logging side, where we ship raw logs out of Vermont to Canada, and they may go on a ship to China and come back processed through Lowe's. We want to be processing and creating and capturing as much of that possible value for the commodity here in Vermont, building businesses that recycle dollars in the Vermont economy, and exporting the high-end value products and using them ourselves here. So that framework came into the conversation with this committee, with agriculture on the House side, and under Carolyn Partridge and her Vice Chair Will Stevens, and people like Chip Conquest and Tristan Tolino and others. And I believe Laura Sibilia probably was very much involved in the conversations one way and another. The House framed Act 142. And Act 142 is really historic. It established the Working Lands Enterprise Program and the Working Lands Enterprise Board. And I'm going to just read the goals of Act 142 because I think they're so significant. Act 142 is designed to stimulate a concerted economic development on behalf of Vermont's agriculture and forest products sector by systematically advancing entrepreneurism, business development, and job creation. It was designed to increase the value of Vermont's raw and value-added products through the development of in-state and export markets, to attract a new generation of entrepreneurs to Vermont's farm, food systems, forest, and value-added chain by facilitating more affordable access to the working landscape, and to increase the amount of state investment in working lands enterprises, particularly when it leverages private and philanthropic funds. So that was an incredibly powerful goal. And with that goal, the legislature had the wisdom to also look at something else that has been sort of just one of those goals that we constantly talk about in state government, which is, wouldn't it be great to build a one-stop shop in this arena? And when they built the Working Lands Enterprise Board, by your design, it included the Agency of Agriculture, the Agency of ANR, Forest Parks and Recreation, and the Agency of Commerce, all in the same room, looking at agriculture, forest products, and value-added development. It also brought in the state authorities. So VEDA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, the Sustainable Jobs Fund, VHCB, all those folks with their resources of loans, of conservation dollars, are all leveraged to the same table so that when creative entrepreneurs come in that door, they're not just looking at a WeLab grant, they're surrounded by the panoply of technical assistance and loan dollars and conservation opportunities that help them jumpstart their businesses much more quickly than they otherwise could. They also have on that board nonprofit leaderships like the Woodworks Council, Shelburne Farms, the County Foresters, NOFA, the Sustainable Jobs Fund, which I already said, the Community Loan Fund, Vermont Land Trust, all of which have the ability to provide additional technical assistance. And then private sector people who ground this work in realism, both on the farm sector and then on the forest side. And that model is really creative and innovative in Vermont and has been highly successful in leveraging investments to hundreds of new businesses in every county of Vermont, helping them grow, helping them create jobs, building innovation. In a way, it's like the research and development fund for the future of Vermont's working landscape, but it's not going out to an academic institution that is that's testing in an academic environment. It's going out to people who are putting their sweat and equity into the land right now and helping them go to the next mile on their most creative ideas to drive their economy forward, to change their marketplace, to capture new opportunities. And I just want to run through some of the stories, and some of these people who've been around for a while have heard, but they're profound in their implications. One of the things that's most interesting about the grants was, and the way this grant structure works and the creativity of the board is, well, there's two things. The first is the idea that the state doesn't have a master plan to tell farmers and forest products businesses what's going to work. Nobody knows. It's like the hemp industry comes in, and some of these enterprises are going to succeed and some aren't. It's like value-added development. Certain niches in cheeses and creativity is going to succeed and some aren't. We can't control that from the top. Instead, it seeds the creativity of small businesses that reach into new market opportunities, design new places in the value chain where they can make money and contribute. And they're taking the risk and they're putting themselves into those situations, but the state's seeding and supporting the creative impulse that they take and move forward as businesses. The other side is that when the project was designed, it was designed not just to look at the individual business, but also to look at how businesses work together, how the value chains work together, how a business can have impact that goes beyond its own doors and beyond its own bottom line to help advance a sector or to help advance a particular arena of work. And so there's some grants that are designed to help the forest products industry work better together and collaborate through the value chain. Other grants may be to a group like Black River Produce, which Black River Produce comes up with the idea that it has the ability to shift and also be a meat producer and a meat packager and a meat, develop and support the progress of beef and pork in the state of Vermont. And so a grant investment from Working Lands to Black River Produce lets them become Black River Meats, build their assembly line for Black River Meats, and it immediately opens up a marketplace for young farmers, for people who've been in dairy and want to shift, for people who have some open land, some beef cow, or develop a pig yard or whatever it is that they choose to do. And that leverages the whole marketplace forward. So other grants, just a sample of the grants that have gone out, Kingdom Creamery in Hardwick, where you have a small dairy that may not be competitive at the bottom of a market economy. And by becoming an ice cream manufacturer, Kingdom Creamery can set their own price, and they can do their own marketing, and they can tell their own story, and they can drive their business forward. Another is Champlain Orchards in Shoreham, where an investment helped them look at the whole value chain for their apples, so that they're no longer just competing for the 3-pound bag, which is sort of the bottom of the commodity economy for apples. They're selling big apples for $1 or whatever you can get for them. They're making their own ciders, and they're also making high-end fermented ciders. They're making ice apple drinks and so forth. And they're also doing donuts and cakes. And for each apple that they pick, they're sorting and capturing the highest end value that they possibly can as a business. And in doing so, they're also aggregating apples for some of the larger cider makers that have been developing in Vermont. And you're seeing new orchards that are growing up in Addison County as a result, which are part of a larger value chain of growth. You have groups like the Maple Wind Farm in Richmond and Huntington, where your seed investment helped them get started with a poultry processing platform on a really small farm. But that poultry processing platform helped them go into the business where they were able to deal with 1,000 turkeys and chickens a year for their marketplace. They're doing vegetables, they're doing this. And so as a CSA and as a local farm, they had a much bigger income base. And they could help their neighbors do it. They could use this center to expand the opportunity for the person who has 50 chickens or 1,000 to also process in the same place. And these folks are approaching 20,000 birds now. So just think of the implications for that part of Vermont. Fat Toad Farm, I talk about a lot, where Callie Hastings and her family had vegetables, they had goats, and they developed a goat milk caramel that is top of the line and has received national and international awards at this point. And she came in, Callie, as a 26-year-old gal to her community and developed this product with her folks in Brookfield. And she said, when I moved back to Brookfield after being away from Vermont, I was the only person in an entrepreneurial role in Brookfield. I didn't have a peer group. But over the course of a couple of years, we grew our business. We had 6 employees, all in their 20s, and we saw 2 other agricultural entities grow in our community. And suddenly, we have a peer group. And part of the challenge of rural Vermont is, who do you date when you're a young person? Like, how do we want to fill those schools? We want to build a next cohort of rural Vermonters. And this is a story where you're seeing that kind of success. Kate Hill Orchards transitions to developing a year-round sheep dairy. The Squire family farm is converting an old milking barn to be a self-serve farmstead operation. Vermont Farm Table expands their local supply chain. You know, they do those really creative, cool, modern chairs and tables with metal frames and got a kind of post-industrial but cool look to them. And they were buying their wood from out of state. So with support of Working Lands, they were able to source and partner with Vermont loggers to do it in-state. Goodrich Lumber, a multi-generation Northeast Kingdom family logging operation that does cedar for homes and for siding and so forth in Westfield. And they were facing regulatory barriers that were going to crush them as an organization. They were able to use WeLab to purchase and expand their logging yard and deal with the regulatory issues to continue to work that business and grow it. Snug Valley Farm, a group that in a time where COVID is happening, they're able to expand their home delivery and product distribution system. So you're seeing a lot of Working Lands investments that are helping people adapt to the current conditions. And of course, the CARES Act money that the legislature also authorized to go through Working Lands in the last year helps backfill for the losses that everyone from dairies to value-added developers have faced in this sector. So Working Lands has been one of the most clear and direct strategic ways that the legislature has invested in the rural economy in a generation. I'm actually speaking for the Working Lands Collaborative today. Amy Schollenberger is here, who represents us and helps us frame our messages and so forth. Nick Kramer, who's in the center of my screen, is working with me at VCRD to support the work of the coalition. The partners in the coalition are Cabot Creamery, the Center for an Agricultural Economy in Hardwick, NOFA, Preservation Trust, Shelburne Farms, the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies. All the RPCs are part of this network because they care very much about the smart balance of working lands and planning for growth in the center of communities. The Community Loan Fund, the Vermont Farm Bureau, the Vermont Land Trust, Vermont Natural Resources Council, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund and Farm to Plate, Vermont Works Council.
Sheets on the dining room table, are those meant to be put on a bed right now, or can just be put away on the...
And the Woodstock Foundation and the Vermont Woodlands Council. So to me, this work that you've all led, that you've produced, has been a spearhead for Vermont's agricultural renaissance. It's more important today than ever as we come out of COVID. People have been through shock. People have had to adjust their markets dramatically. People have a huge creative opportunity as we come out of this to look at new opportunities for growth in their businesses. For us, it's really important that this work is seeded and sustained with leadership over time. It's not like the agriculture community is transitioned and it's done. It's a significant piece of work for Vermont's future. And it may be the most direct investment that the legislature makes in rural community and economic development. So the Working Lands Collaborative is hopeful that the legislature will continue to support Working Lands, that the Ag Committee will be the lead committee on the House to drive this work with support, as has been in the past, from House Commerce. And we appreciate and hope that you will continue your leadership as a caucus. This caucus has sent letters in support of Working Lands. People have divided out and supported it within their committees and encouraged their committees to step up. Obviously, the Appropriations Committee has been critical, and your leadership in advocating with the Appropriations Committee has made the difference when it comes right down to it, in terms of both the existence of the fund and its capacity to achieve great things. We're hoping that this year the House will appropriate $1 million $500,000 to Working Lands Enterprises and continue the leadership that you've had. And I'm here today to share that hope and to ask for your leadership. I'd be glad of any questions, Representative Kimbell.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that overview. And I know that I have a few questions, but just to seed it a little bit. So every government program goes through a life cycle from its start to its maturation and then plateau, and then like any business. So the concern is always about where is Working Lands Enterprise on that growth cycle, on that life cycle. The second point, just the question is, sometimes there's questions about investing directly in a business. So the state puts money as a grant in somebody's business. So if you could just talk about that. And then I wonder if there's any information about the success of Working Lands Enterprise businesses versus general business. You know what I mean? There's obviously value that returns to the community, but is there a higher success rate of Working Lands Enterprise businesses besides all of the other intangibles? So that's what I was hoping.
That's a great set of questions, Charlie. And I'm not sure I got them all in order. The competitive side is, the middle question is really important, I think, in terms of the state, you know, there's a very long-term way of thinking about the role of the state, which is that the state doesn't choose winners or losers. And that when it comes to economic development, we answer the phone and we support any business that needs help. And that's an essential service of the Agency of Commerce, and it's an essential role of state government in assisting businesses. There are limitations to that view. There are businesses that fit Vermont and that benefit Vermont and that have multiple benefits in terms of both landscape, the benefit to tourism, the connection to community, the security of food supply, the role in attracting next generation people. When you think about how the Working Lands Investment Board works, it's not a handout to anyone who's got an idea. It's highly competitive. It's a competition for which platforms of work, which business and which value chain is going to make the most difference in driving Vermont's rural economy forward. And through the legislature, you've put together a leadership team that has as much capacity to make those decisions as any group in the state of Vermont. So from our end, we don't think it's our job to second guess the decisions of that group. We think that competition is highly healthy. It's still a capitalist economy out there, and young people and businesses that are developing are taking risks. And these investments are choosing places where they perceive that the benefit and return on that investment is highest. In terms of some of the statistical questions, the caucus might want to invite the Agency of Agriculture and Commerce to come in and testify about that. I don't have data, Charlie, that can systematically define what businesses are suffering and what businesses are growing. But I think if you look at the list of creative businesses that have received funds, you're looking at a lot of the spear point businesses in communities in all of Vermont. They're in every county, and they're businesses that are inventing new models and building momentum, and often hiring young people. And many of them are led by young people. So when we look at the economic doldrums and the loss of youth that we see in so many parts of Vermont, it's a very deliberate strategy to seed success of next generation entrepreneurship. But that's another question that you'd probably want to talk to the agency about, and they're working all the time to develop that.
Thank you. And Amy put some comments in the chat too. So I know my co-chair was about to say something, or I know, Laura, did you want to say something, or?
Just wanted to refresh refresh ourselves on what the funding was last year for working lands, non-COVID, and then COVID.
I don't remember if it was $750,000. And instead, I believe that the baseline had been like 560,000 or something like that, and we had increased it to 750. Anybody have a better figure on that?
The 595 is a figure that the governor has had in his budget as his sense of baseline budget. When you think about the built structure here, that the built structure is way overbuilt for a fund of that scale. And the legislature, not this last year with the CARES money, but the year before, you added $1 million to that through the appropriations process to bring it up to one of its higher points in its history. It's gone from 1.5 in its first year to it's fluctuated, and it's really the outcome has been determined by the leadership of the House in pushing for these investments over time.
And this caucus has often weighed in, I think, in terms of whether or not the governor's baseline was enough, or there needed to be a request for additional funds.
Yeah, I think you've had a decisive influence on the appropriations process, that I think it's fair to say.
Terrific, thank you. So Representative Sims.
Thanks, Paul. What an awesome program that's made such a difference in all of our communities. You, in the success stories, a lot of them seemed from the ag side of the coin, and I guess I'd be curious to hear from you about the pipeline and the challenges and opportunities around investments in the forestry industry.
Great question. There have been a number of them, and I don't have a full list with me today, Catherine, but it might be really good to have Michael Schneider come in, the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation. He's been one of the most ardent advocates for this project. And I don't know if Amy has stories that she would want to tell. We certainly have seen the two biggest, I think, timber frame companies in Vermont have really jump-started their assembly lines with investments. Sometimes the forest products industry challenges are, it's a little bit like a big dairy doing a transition. A lot of the working lands investments over time have been relatively small. They're, $20,000 to $50,000 that help you do a switch in a small operation to add a cooler, or to add a small slaughter facility in the poultry processing. But for a mill that's got a multi-million-dollar set of challenges, sometimes the dollars aren't enough. And the Working Lands Board has been looking strategically at making seed investments at a larger scale. So some of the investments in timber frame development are part of that. And so there are a lot of other small businesses. Maple Landmark has been supported in Middlebury, which does all kinds of creative value-added development, from toys to spoons and plaques, and just all kinds of different wood products.
I think we have questions from Representative Rosenquist, then Representative Austin, and then Representative Page. So Carl. Carl, you're muted right now. So, yep. There you go.
What my space button didn't work, and that's usually what I press, and it didn't put me on this time. But anyway, the two questions. One was for how many years has this fund existed, and the state supported it to some extent, and two, what is the range of grants, like from, you talked about like 25,000 to like 100, or what sort of range do we have in the grants that are given out? Thank you.
Sure. I think it was 2014 that it was established. And then I think that their current grants are probably between 10,000 and 125,000. They've done some big projects with dairy conversions and with mills that have been much more expensive. For the board, having those larger investments is really important when you're looking at these significant transitions. So that's been the range.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Sarita?
Yes, I met with a group of farmers at the beginning of the session, and there was a sheep farmer who talked about the demand for slaughterhouses and how difficult it is for him to find a slaughterhouse. And I'm wondering if anything is being developed on that end.
They're looking hard at it. And I think if you brought in Secretary Tebbets from the agency, he would tell you that that's one of his core priorities. Working lands, when you think about all the kinds of issues like that, the different sectors that are either blocks or gaps in supply chain, working lands has the ability to leverage in. You know, when you think about the problem of slaughter, one of the most significant challenges is that you can't just fund a slaughterhouse. You fund the entrepreneur who's going to lead the development of the slaughterhouse. It's not a building, it's the leader who's taking the risk, who's going to go to the bank with this, who's going to develop and lead the business forward. And there are people who are doing that, and the Working Lands Enterprise Program has got the ability to set that as one of its cornerstone strategies and encourage those grants. I know they're working with the secretary right now on that one.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Woody?
Yes, I have a question regarding this past year during the pandemic. What are the changes that you've made in areas of investments with working lands? And I guess basically, you've given a good overview of some of your successes, but could you also tell us what some of the results have been just this past year during this difficult time? Thank you.
Yeah, so they're certainly not my successes or VCRD's. We don't have anything to do with the actual functioning of this program. No money comes to us out of this. We only advocate because we think it's so critical to the rural economy. But this past year saw that 3.5 million investment in, which was, you know, when you think about what people have gone through, they've lost their market, or they have had their ability to do their work completely disrupted. And similarly on the dairy side, and similarly on the forest side. In the legislature, my understanding is through the CARES Act, 3.5 million went into the general fund of Working Lands Enterprises to be available to cover losses. And 5 million was appropriated for the forest products industry with the ability to cover their losses. And then the dairy investment that was made through CARES dollars, I believe about $29 million has been dispersed, and that's to cover losses. So in this period of crisis, that has been an enormously important priority. But we're not, when you look towards the future of the economy, it's not just subsidizing losses for challenging times, it's also seeding the creative idea that's going to be the next generation for business development and for the future of that economy. And that's what your regular investment does. So from our point of view, it would be a big mistake to rely on federal funds to subsidize losses as a framework for the future and the story of WeLab. It really needs to be the innovative and competitive investment in creative work going forward. And in main part, that means the investment of state funds, general funds, in seeding enterprise development in that creative, competitive way in future.
And if I could also follow up, these creative ideas that have been invested in over your period of time for 8 years. How many of those have you actually invested in, and how many of those are still active today? Do you have any data on that?
I think you really should talk to the Agency of Ag on that. What I see and what I've heard is that we've made tremendous progress. That the $7 million total investment that's been made by the state has leveraged $36 million of additional sales by these businesses. It's leveraged millions and millions of dollars of additional investment. It's leveraged hundreds and hundreds of jobs. And so there's a great story of success, some of which we've documented and other which is very detailed through the agency's work. They track every single grantee and they have the data. I don't think many of the grantees have gone out of business. I think that they've got an incredibly high success rate. And historically, we've seen that for the amount of investment, they've gotten as high a return in job creation as any other program that we see in state government, direct job creation. And they count those in the year that they happen. So one of the things that you see is the leverage of this work over time. You know, the growth of Black River produce, they may have charted that 20 jobs came from that state investment. But when you think of it 8 years later or 5 years later, what has that done for job creation in helping small businesses, young people, dairy farmers keep beef cow or keep pigs that have added to that economy and added to those jobs in ways that are much harder to count, but add up to significant advantage. One of the things that points us in a great direction is the work of the Sustainable Jobs Fund and Farm to Plate, which shows that over about an 8-year period, coming up to the last year, we went from about the amount of food that we consume that comes from the local farms and local communities, on average, is about 5%. And we've seen that grow to over 13% in that 8-year period. So we are being successful in Vermont in consuming more local foods and strengthening the basis of that economy. We also are seeing, and this again is anecdotal, so you'd need to do homework to find some of the foundations, but Dan Smith and Roger Albee reported last year to the Ag committees on the House and Senate side that on the dairy side, we'd gone from where 90-some-odd% of milk left the state in fluid form to be processed about 10 years ago. And we're getting up to where 50% of milk that's produced in Vermont is being processed in Vermont. So the value-added production through yogurts, cheeses, ice creams, we've seen tremendous success. You know, for those guys, they believe there's an opportunity for Vermont to think about a branding process that's much more deliberate, that also could have a pricing mechanism that could support Vermont dairy farms, something like a dairy compact between the producers who are adding value, because we reach a market scale that's at a level that we can control and work mutually together around that. And, you know, the story of the mutual economy, what Hardwick started when they raised the flag and said, we're going to be the center of Vermont's agricultural renaissance. And they worked together to, they lent each other money. They worked to distribute together. They worked to build partnerships to expand what they could do. Jasper Hill growing a cheese cave 5 times bigger than they could conceive that they would need alone for themselves, and bringing in Cabot and helping their neighboring farms learn how to develop cheeses, then aging, transporting, distributing together so that they can not just benefit their own farm, but significantly transform Vermont's capacity to be a national and international leader in cheese. That's kind of the essential model for the future in so much of this work.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it's this, as we could spend a lot of time. This is a great introduction to this subject for a lot of members. and may point to what we want to hear from in the future. I'm just looking at the time, knowing that folks have to get to committee and stuff. We do have one more question. Well, Lucy just dropped off with her question, but Catherine has her hand raised. Paul, thank you. And I'm going to pursue some of the answers that have been asked. So from Agency of Ag in terms of the Working Lands Enterprise Board and some of the forestry questions. So I'll be pursuing that, and we can share some of the information that has also been shared with us by Amy Schellenberg. Laura, you're unmuted. No, you're not unmuted.
I am, but I have nothing to say.
Okay, so Catherine, you have your hand up, yes?
Yeah, thanks. I just had an announcement, if now would be an appropriate time for that. So just wanted to follow up on the mention of the Northeast Kingdom recovery plan that I mentioned last week. That report has been updated, and there'll be a presentation, 2 presentations next week, one Monday from 8 to 9 and one Friday from noon to 11 on that NEK recovery plan, which focuses on rural economic development around the areas of broadband, housing, education, support for small businesses, and community vitality. And so if anyone's interested in hearing directly from folks from the Northeast Kingdom about the challenges and opportunities and the key strategies and levers that the region is looking at to advance recovery and build a thriving, vibrant region, let me know. I'll send out in the minutes an RSVP to those 2 events, and anyone who's interested in attending is more than welcome to. We'll be sending out a copy of the report as well. But please come either on Monday or Friday to learn more about recovery for rural communities.
Terrific. Thank you, Catherine. And again, thank you, Paul, Nick, Amy, everyone showing up for Working Lands Enterprise. Your knowledge and experience is valuable for us. Thank you so much.
And a reminder.
Yes, that next
week. Yes.
Yes, we'll be meeting with Lewis Porter from Act 2, from the Agency of Natural Resources specifically. He's the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife, but is the administration's lead on any kind of Act 250 reform. So he's going to be telling us what the administration would like to see differently in that piece of land use regulation. So as part of our ongoing discussion about what looms in terms of changes there.
And we will be asking him to speak to the executive order that the governor put forward for folks new members who don't know. The legislature needs to act on those, or well, if the legislature does not act on those, they automatically go into law. Governor has 10 days to propose those types of activities in the start of a new biennium. And so he has proposed significant action on Act 250. So we'll also ask Commissioner Porter to talk about that.
Terrific. And I'm trying to figure out a way to copy the chat. So if anybody knows how to copy the chat so I can send that out to find myself.
You should get a download, whoever the host is, after the meeting in your Zoom folder on your hard drive. There should be a download.
Cool. Thank you, Amy. I'll definitely do that because there's a lot of great links in there that people have just applied. So I want to make sure that we get that out to folks. Okay. Thank you very much. Another great discussion here. And Paul, thank you again. Have a great week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.